all and welcome. This is going to be the LFM license guide for season 17 already. We've been to Zolder in the past, but since the game changed and we also changed the car, it's time to make a new track guide for this purpose as well. What you need to achieve is, and I've written this down in the data pack as well, that you will get for free, well, whether or not you watch this video, really. So you just got to go to popometa.io, register. You can use your Steam login, that's perfectly fine. And you'll already find this data pack in your account. It's called the LFM S17 license pack. In that, you will get replay files, you'll get a setup file, so you will be able to copy one-to-one what I was doing here in this video and the lap that I've been recording, and it also states what you need to do, and that is 7 consecutive valid laps with an average below 132.5. The lap time I'm doing here is 127.2, so just about 5 seconds faster than what you need to do is quite possible with the McLaren here. Also, the McLaren is capable of going harshly over the curbs without being affected too much. So this is one of the best cars we can take for this license here. Of course, you could take any other car you want. Again, this is not about going fast here. This license that you have to acquire for LFM is more about proving that you are capable of putting a different target above lap time, and that is doing valid laps, that is avoiding mistakes, that is taking care, and that is the proof you need to bring to LFM in order to show them that you should be allowed to race on this platform. Because once you have other players around you, when you kind of don't sacrifice your own lap time every now and then you'll crash with other people and everybody's going to have a bad experience. So see the license as something where you prove that you are a driver that can be trusted rather than a fast driver. Okay, this is what it's going to be about. So in this guide, we're going to go corner by corner, how you should approach it. While that we are going to talk about the basics of driving a racing car as well a bit. And we'll also always go back and forth with the data because I feel this really highlights what you should be doing in each corner. And again, you just download the recorder, register for free. It's not going to cost you anything to do this. And then you can put your lab side by side with the lab I've provided in this data pack. And then it should be really easy to see those differences, because I know when you see it like this and then, okay, I'm going to brake like this and I'm going to steer like this. Yeah, it feels all the same. But if you actually put it side by side, you will quickly notice that the differences between your driving and my driving are still quite large. And just that moment is rather eye-opening and often is going to lead you to change your approach simply by being able to get a first idea of how far away you actually are from going fast around the track. Before we go for the first corner in the replay, let's just talk about principles real quick here, because some of you might be just starting with sim racing, especially with your when you're struggling still reaching the lap time here. It's most likely because you're not following the principles of driving. And one of those principles would be that we're always trying to take the widest arch through a corner, which makes it the easiest for the car to drive on. So the tighter you take a corner, the more difficult it is going to be. The wider you take a corner, the more easy it is for the car to go around that corner. And the standard way to do that is, of course, to start cornering from the outside. So we're approaching from here. And we're going to be on the very outside initially, slow the car down. It can be in a smooth way. It can be in a harsh way. We're probably not there yet to go into the details. And then coming for the corner, we want to be on the very inside, depending on what that corner allows. Could be a harsh curb, could be nothing at all, could just be a track limit with a white line that you're not allowed to cross any further, but we want to be on the most inside that is possible for that turn. And then from there on, we're going to let the car gravitate to the most outside position again. And just from here to here, we're going to have the widest arch that the car has the easiest way to drive on, or the fastest. When you make it too tight, when you're starting to approach the corner from, say, the middle of the track, then you will be forced to slow down the car because we're now driving a tighter line that the car is not going to be able taking at a higher speed like the good drivers would do. So that is one of the first principles, and you can just summarize that as outside, inside, outside. And with that principle, you're already going to have 80% of lap time sorted, more or less. Okay, that is the first principle that we should consider when we're trying to go fast around a racetrack. Then the second thing is, and this is probably just as important, tires have a finite amount of grip. So when we approach the first corner here, let's actually go for that a little bit. You will see where I start the braking. We'll talk about the brake point there in a second. But the important thing is, as long as we are going straight, and initially we are, we can use all the grip available for slowing down the car. So initially the braking is going to be harsh, almost 100%. You can probably go right to 100%, no problem. But as soon as you start turning the steering wheel, and this is what you're seeing in the second chart here, as soon as the steering angle increases, we need to slowly let go of the brake, because there is a finite amount of grip that the front tires can give us. And the more of the grip you're requesting in terms of steering, the less grip is going to be available to still slow down the car. And if you are doing too much, so maybe the maximum steering needed for the turn, plus still a lot of braking, then very likely the car is going to behave weirdly. Sometimes it will understeer, sometimes it will oversteer, but the fact is that you are overwhelming the tires. You're requesting more grip than is available. And again, in a straight line, 100% braking is fine. Once you're cornering at maximum speed and at maximum grip, no additional braking will be possible because the tire is already used to its full capacity. And of course, there are basically infinite combinations in between. So could be half the steering the tire can take with half the brake the tire can take, and everything in between there as well. And this is the typical trail braking that you'll hear about so often in racing, that as you increase your steering angle, you need to let go of the brake, else the car is not able to take your steering input and convert it into cornering. So that is the second principle. And the same then applies for the exit of the corner, where there's also a finite amount of grip available. If you're going too fast already and you're asking a lot of steering from the car and rotation, if you're too aggressive with the throttle, it's not going to work. And if you are not aggressive enough with the throttle, it's also not going to work. But this is what we're going to talk about now, going into the detail. Another very important thing, of course, is every corner has a latest point where you should start the braking. And if you're copying me one-to-one, trust me, this is already kind of the latest point that is possible. So if you are braking later than me, you are definitely not making the corner the fastest way possible. So now when you're comparing to me or any other driver with a decent lap time here, make sure as a beginner, if you're trying to brake later than the professional, it's not going to work. Okay, so the latest you want to brake is where I go, but it would probably be better in the case of this license test here, where you can be 5 seconds slower a lap still, to actually brake earlier. Make it 5 meters, make it 10 meters. That's already going to have a huge difference. So what is the first marker here? Being outside of the car, you can see there's one black flag hiding here. There's another black flag right here, and that seems to be just about where my brake starts to light up there. But in the cockpit, it's pretty hard to see, so we can only kind of use the black flag when we approach it as a rough reference. Might work for you. A better way for me is usually I try to look at that board arriving and then behave towards that. You don't necessarily have to find a thing on the track where you start braking. It can also be something that is in a certain amount of distance, and you'll very quickly get used to the exact distance an object has towards you, and you can just use something that's a little further away, just as good as a braking reference. Then let's go forward a little bit, and let's keep it slow here as well in the replay. I will show the full lap at the end of the video. So initially, harshly on the brakes, staying straight a little bit. And as soon as I start turning the wheel here, you can see also that the brake is decreasing. And once the brake is 0, the maximum steering angle is reached. The car is capable to take a lot of curbs, which is why I chose the McLaren here for Zolder as well. And the other bit you want to see is, let's go backwards here a tiny bit again. Probably around here. That as soon as I'm on the curb, I know, okay, the corner is opening a little bit after the middle of the turn or the apex or the inside curb. So we can carry more speed in the second half of the turn already, because the radius that we are having to drive on can be bigger now. The other important thing, and that is very ACC in particular, and that's not going to translate well to iRacing or Automobilista or Affector, LMU, not sure actually. But in ACC, it's very important to be aggressive with the initial throttle in a lot of situations, especially when we are in fast corners where downforce applies already. Once you are aggressive enough with the throttle, you will notice that the car keeps rotating. If you're not aggressive enough with the throttle, you will likely experience more understeer. So the initial bit of throttle often has to be 70, 80% right away. And then you're just going to stay there a little bit, increase, decrease as needed, but make sure it's enough for the rears, or for there to be enough power on the rear wheels so they start slipping a bit and the car keeps rotating. Then we're going to run wide here as much as we're allowed, which is pretty much into the sand. You can see the inside tires, they can actually be behind the white line. We still have room to go. And then it's a very typical era of beginners to now be kind of happy that you solved this corner. You take a bit of a breather before you're approaching the next turn. But this is not going to work here. We need to keep working all the time. So right when this corner is done, we are positioning the car aggressively over to the left. We're aiming for the outside here because there's very little time to place the car again. And for beginners, especially when we're in this situation, probably want to have this perspective here. You can see that the middle of the car is aiming for the outside of the track, which means once you're hitting the brake and once your eyes are starting to find the corner on the inside there, you will be scared to touch the white line, perhaps go into the grass and spin. So your best approach to avoid that really is to align the car early, go aggressively over to the left side and approach that corner almost in parallel here already with a white line. And then this means you can't accidentally go wide over the white line into the grass here. So this is going to be make your life easier because now you are able to focus on the corner. Look towards the apex, find it, adjust the car's speed and position depending on how you feel you're making it into the turn. So this is one of the few tricks that you want to be working towards. Make sure the car as you hit the brake is parallel or almost parallel to the white line. This is going to kind of take a lot of stress out of the situation, make it easier for you where you need to put the car. All right, let's go forward a little bit. Since I've done a lot of laps here, and even more so in ACC in general, I kind of am more confident going close to the white line here while the car is traveling to the outside. But again, try to follow that tip that I said earlier. Then this is a very interesting corner here. There's already kind of a first kink happening where the corner isn't actually starting, then there's a bit of a straight, and then the corner starts again. So what we're doing here is we're taking a bit of a shortcut through this kind of section here, and then we're turning in just after kind of that first kink here. And as a rough reference, you can see this in the cockpit as well. Ideal line here in ACC is painted rather wide, and we want to be to the very left of that, but you don't want to be next to the white line because you can see it in a different view here. Here are going to be a lot of marbles on the outside where you are not going to have a lot of grip. And the same already applies here. The grip is not as high, even though if you cannot see the marbles. So just be, kind of stay shy or stay away here from this bright bit on the very left because the grip there is not going to be very high. Then where we are aiming here in the corner, and maybe restart elsewhere actually by going to turn 2 and seeing what the brake input actually is here. You can see the initial braking is going to be 70, 80% or something like that. We're never going to 100 because going to 100 prevents the car from being able to turn. But since the braking zone is rather short and this weird kink is happening here, we are already cornering the car. You can see where the 0 line is in the steering. We are already steering as we're approaching the corner, which means we're already requesting grip from the front tires that we cannot use in the braking. So using a bit in the steering means we cannot go to 100% in the braking. It's going to cause weird car behavior. And if we want a consistent, predictable car, make sure you're only going towards the limit of the tire and never or very rarely above it. because every time you're above it, you're going to see weird behavior. And just for this license test, we want to stay well below the limit. It's still going to be fine lap time wise. So braking here, we're not going 100%, and then we're bleeding off the brake as we go deeper into the turn. This is not the smoothest line possible, but again, that is not, there is no perfect, so to say. In this scenario, it's just important that you're not overdriving the tire, going into the steering more and more and more until you find your groove into this turn. Then you can also see where the ideal line is clipping the curb, and you can really just follow that here on Zolder. And the other bit is, again, initially onto the throttle is going to be quite aggressive to keep the car rotating. Let's find the braking marker for this one real quick though, because we did that for the first time, but not for this one. It's more tricky here. And there is a tiny house on the left, and you can pretty much just about, once it starts clipping the A-pillar, this is going to be a rough reference. But there's also a brake patch in the front here of the car that you can use as a reference, but not where you actually start braking. It's just something you see on the track and you can behave towards, and then say, well, a certain distance to this brighter patch there in the track, you're going to see it as I go forward. Here's the bright patch coming towards us. This is something you're going to see in the cockpit and that you can use as a reference to finding your brake point for this corner, but maybe it also works for you to use the house on the left side there. Then as soon as the car comes into the turn, as we reach the curb, this is when we'll already be on power again. Quickly to 80-90%, hold it a little bit, see what the car does, and then increase to 100 once you feel comfortable with that. You can go very wide here. The next corner is opening up, and there's never really an issue making that turn, usually, as long as your apex isn't coming too early here. So if the apex in turn 2 here is pretty much in the middle of the corner, you're going to be fine with that curb on the exit, and then the car will easily come back to the inside for this flat out right-hander here. The next corner is really tricky. Let's go a little further. Again, braking marker is pretty easier to find here than in other turns. We have this exit road coming here from the left. You can pretty much use that as a rough reference. This is where my brake is already starting. You can also behave towards where the ideal line gets darker again, but I think the exit road is a bit closer, easier to behave towards. Again, the braking should probably not be too aggressive, and also we are not needing a lot of braking to begin with. So jumping to turn 4 here in the telemetry data, you can see the initial braking is just going to be 80-something% or so, because again, we are already starting to steer into the corner with a very short braking zone only available. And then as we increase the steering angle, the braking decreases more and more and more. And that's the important bit. Never go 100% here, and you'll have a predictable and stable car. For this corner, though, we have a track that is super wide here as we approach the corner. And there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 cars could fit here in theory. And now as we go forward, you will see the corner is getting quite a bit narrower, and on the exit the track is going to be even more narrow. Again, you can follow where the black markings are hitting the curb as a rough reference, or just where the curb gets the widest is usually the point where you want to use the most of it. But more interestingly here for that corner is where we want to be on the throttle again. And these two lines here that we are painting into the track map can help you quite a bit. The purple one is where the car is the tightest in the corner, so where we're cutting the curb the most, where we're the most inside, where we're crossing the white line the most. And the blue marker is going to be where the car is the slowest. This means up until this point, the car is becoming slower, either from using the brake or simply from coasting, meaning you're doing nothing. And from that point onwards, we are accelerating, so increasing the speed. And just these 2 points can tell you a lot about how each corner needs to be approached. And most of the time, you will find the apex is coming after the minimum speed in a corner. And especially when you're starting out with sim racing, it's going to look like this very often, where you have the apex right, but you're still decreasing speed past the apex. And that also means that when you're only accelerating from here, you're going to be slower for the entire straight that's coming afterwards. And that, I think, is a major perspective change that you need to have. So let's focus on that at least for a couple seconds. If you look at this, straights on any track are going to cover much more distance, and you'll spend much more time on straights than you're spending in the corners. And therefore it is important to be fast on the straights, not so fast in the corners actually, because we're going through this turn. It's probably take us 1.5 to maybe 3 seconds for the entire corner, but we're spending at least 10 seconds on the straight. And if you're fast in the corner, you might gain a tenth there, but you're going to be slow for the 10 seconds afterwards on the entire straight, where the pro driver is going to just kill you pretty much. So making sure you have smooth exits and you don't have to lift the throttle often is a good sign that you're getting towards the right compromises here, emphasizing the right parts on the track. So we always want to be fast on straights. This is the easy part, and then slow it down for the corners enough to be able to enter the straights fast. And usually that means having an apex in the middle of the turn or slightly after the middle of the corner. But very rarely we'll see an apex that is actually before the middle of the corner. Let's see if we come across one here. So this track then is narrowing on the exit here. So you just want to keep that in mind. It's going to feel like the corner is closing, and therefore, again, to keep the car rotating, we need the aggressive throttle into the turn, especially since it's quite a high speed. We have a lot of downforce. The car is super stable. If you're not aggressive on the throttle, the car keeps understeering into the gravel there, and there was only a very narrow curb available on the exit. Next corner, there's the 100-meter board, and that works just perfect as a brake marker for you. When you're comparing against a pro driver, make sure to be 5-10 meters earlier, especially here for the license. You're never going to beat a pro driver on the brakes. No chance whatsoever, okay? So if you're trying to brake as late as the pro, you're probably too late. Reality check where the braking actually happens, because when you're in the cockpit, it feels like we already passed the 100-meter board, but just going to the outside camera here with F7, you can see that the car is just about with the nose clipping the 100-meter board. So this is the perfect brake marker here. Very important for the chicane ahead is also there's a straight afterwards where we want to be quick. So the target is to go through the corner in a way that we are going to be fast on the straight again. And this is the most tricky part on the track. So let's slow it down a little. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. Also, the braking here for the first time is going to be true 100% for quite a while. Let the ABS sort the car out. This is no problem whatsoever. It's really a straight braking zone without, pretty much difficulties. And then as soon as we start turning into the corner, same pattern. The more we steer, the less we can brake. But there is more to see. And this is going to show you how we are cutting these corners. Let's go into the cockpit because I think it's showing a little better here. Turn in starts, braking decreases. And what we are aiming for is a lot of this first curb. And the second bit you're going to see is already I'm almost half or 3/4 onto the throttle before the car touches the curb at all, right? We're still fairly ahead of that. And what this does is a bit of throttle stabilizes the car, and B, the throttle helps the car gain some ride height on the front end of the car, which is going to reduce the amount of bottoming out that you're getting, and it's going to give you a smoother chicane overall. So if you're braking too late and you're still forced to brake onto the curb, the car is going to bottom out and, well, likely crash. So make sure you're slowing down early enough so that you can be on the throttle when you jump over the curb here. You can see the track limits are very lenient here. On the right side, we are cutting across the curb quite a bit, even behind the rain gutter there. So there's a lot of track that we can use. And the whole idea of that is the first curb we can take, the second one is even higher, and we can rarely take. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But again, for this exercise here, for the license, we are trying to get 7 clean laps without crashes, no invalidations. So we are avoiding the second curb entirely, because the car can really bounce there and it's not really helping us around. And again, lap time is not the focus here. You need to prove you're able to focus on clean driving, not fast driving. And then we wait for the car to settle, and then we pick up the throttle, and we just about clip the curb here, but we're not using as much as the game would allow. The track limits would allow us to be, well, almost a half a car width or more to the right, but then it gets very bouncy, bumpy. The car might never regain the grip really and keeps jumping for another 50 meters, and it also won't accelerate. So in order to bring speed onto the straight here, make sure to take a lot of the left curb, very little of the right curb. And if you want to look at the data, it's gonna look like this now. It's going to tell a very different story once you put your data side by side with that. Same pattern here, apex in the middle of the turn, accelerating from way before reaching the apex there already. Again, same pattern here as well. Throttle up to, well, actually 100% here, even going to stabilize the car, lift up the nose, give a bit more ground clearance, make it easier to go over that curb. And then if you lift, just stay on it a little bit, okay? That's going to keep the car planted. From 50-60% onwards, the car should behave in a bit of an understeery way. After that, it can become more oversteery again. We're going to explain that, or once you watch other videos of me, I'll explain that in detail elsewhere. Let's move forward to the next turns. We want to take a bit of a wide swing here, because once this corner here ends, it's flat out, it's easy. But the braking zone is going to be very shortly after, and we want to be positioned by the time we do the braking, which is here just after that corner ends. So your target, again, like in turn 2, is to have the car aligned with a white line on the left here. So you're already going straight as you hit the brake. If the car still is at an angle, you need to reposition under braking, then it's just going to make your life a lot more difficult. So make sure to take that wide line through the corner before, to be tight on the end and already drive alongside in the same direction as the white line. And then this corner up ahead will be a lot easier. So let's go back to the cockpit, roll it back a little bit to find the brake marker. And again, give you an idea. So taking the wide swing here, not so much following the ideal line that ACC is painting, because that then would mean we still have to reposition. Now, going tight here, straightening up the car, and that is when we hit the brake. So just about, let's go from the outside, you can see it better. Ideal line kind of ends, starts again. This is the reference you see in the cockpit here. This is what you can use. Brake a tiny bit before that, and even a tiny bit earlier than I do, and you should be fine for the corner ahead. Now, this one is going to combine a lot of the things we've already seen. Harsh initial braking, because we're going straight, we're not requesting any steering, so we can use all the grip available for slowing down the car. Now, slowly increasing the steering angle, and now the brake drops and drops and drops, and the steering increases, and we're aiming to use a lot of curb here as well. Make sure you keep the cone on the inside alive. I know it might be tricky on the license server with a lot of people driving. This might disappear, so don't shy away from disconnecting from the server, reconnecting, and the cone is going to be there again. I'm not even sure I'm hitting it here, but we can use a lot of the track here, and there can be a whole discussion about what the track designers are actually trying to tell us. Is the white line the track limit? No. Is the curb the track limit? No. Okay, then they put sausages and then green stuff and then a cone. They need to decide, and you need to figure out where that track limit is. It is tricky. Let's view from above how much you can really take. You can see probably the outside tires, they cannot be behind the red and white curb. Okay, so make sure outside tires are always on the red and white curb. Then your lap is going to be valid. Don't hit the cone. The other thing is, and we need to roll it backwards here a little bit, because Zolder is very special in a lot of ways. So let's stick to this camera and actually go down a little to the floor, and you will see what might be a challenge here. There also is an extra menu when you hit the middle mouse button where you can change the camera. And we can zoom in a little bit, and that's going to show us a little bit better how the 3D shape of the track really is. And now you can also see that in the middle of the curves, we kind of have, well, a hole or a valley. And there is a very deep point of the track here. And if you put the car into this place, this means it needs to go uphill here quite severely. If we view this from the other side, you will be able to see that the car is kind of jumping down there. And that means we'll have an issue again with ground clearance. So now we're pretty much running into the ground aggressively, and that is why we're using the throttle again to lift the nose up, stabilize the car. Okay, and the later you brake, the harsher you brake into that curb here, the more problems you're going to have. So make sure you brake early enough so that you're able to use the throttle when the car is needed to go into this ditch there. Let's slow it down a little bit. Just look where the throttle is coming into play. Pretty much just before we're reaching the lowest point there. That now is going to stabilize the car, and the bump is going to be less severe. Now between those two turns, never really need a lot of throttle. We are only using the throttle to stabilize the car. Not so much to accelerate or change the speed. Through this corner, you can see here the speed is very, sorry, wrong turn. The speed here through this section is very stable. We're only using the throttle to help the car around here in the first turn to mitigate the bump there a little bit, and in the left-hander to keep the car stable. We use 50-60% throttle, something like that, and then the car will be less likely to turn too much into one direction or the other, because we have to do a very quick direction change here. And it's important to use a little bit of throttle to stabilize the car, because with enough power output, the differential on the rear tires is going to be locked and prevents the car from rotating too quickly. That means the combination of steering input and throttle input has a huge impact on how the car is going to behave. Drive this corner without throttle input and you'll spin. Drive with too much throttle and you'll understeer. Drive with half throttle and just keep the speed steady, and you'll have a stable, predictable car able to place it nicely. Again, the track limits in the left-hander here are also a tiny bit weird. Easier for you to compare in the data, I think, than to watch it in the replay. There's also a cone on the inside that we just want to avoid. Maybe that's probably the best target you have, but also depending on the car you're taking, the track limit is going to be a tiny bit different. But same thing here, more or less. Outside tires still need to be on the red and white, and then you should be fine most of the time. Then just watch the throttle trace here, still keeping the car stable, not really accelerating. Now between the turns, bringing the speed up a little bit, but as we change direction, lifting on the throttle again a tiny bit, open up the differential, allows the car to rotate. And as soon as the car does that, as soon as the front tires bite in the direction change, you want to increase the throttle again. And that is the thing you're seeing here in this part. So changing direction from turning left to turning right, we are aggressive in the throttle, stabilizes the car, throwing it into the turn. As we reach the steering angle, we want to have a quick lift on the throttle that's going to help the front tires bite. The car will start the rotation, but in order to not get too much rotation, quickly back onto the throttle, stabilize the car. So what you need to do, this is not going to work just the first attempt you do this, right? But what you want to learn about is the relationship about your throttle position and the willingness of the car to rotate. And once you start playing with that, you'll be fine going through the section sooner or later. Then flat out from here, make sure to take a wide swing here. Just about where the curb ends is where you want to really turn in. You can be aggressive here. We already have a lot of speed, a lot of downforce. The car is going to be stable. Throw it into the turn, clip the curb a little bit. Somewhat of a late apex here for this one, even though in this view it looks pretty much like we're in the middle of the turn, actually is where we are the most inside. And then the exit here in the McLaren should usually not be a problem, especially when you're not carrying the same exit speed from the chicane like I do, which is very likely. You'll have no trouble with this corner here whatsoever, and it should always be flat out. Same thing here, reposition early. The brake marker is pretty much going to be the 100-meter board or where the track turns dark again. That you can use as a brake marker. We're going to brake in a straight line, so harsh on the brake, no steering whatsoever. Just keep it straight, wait for the speed to come down, and then as you start turning the steering wheel, release the brake more and more and more. In this one, in the hairpins, we are trying to be on the inside with a tiny bit of a late apex. So when we're taking the corner in half, a late apex means that we are on the most inside position, slightly after the middle of the turn. So if that should be the middle of the turn perhaps. So you're seeing that apex is just a tiny bit after that as a rough reference. This is why you want to be the tightest. And that also means that the car is going to be slightly more straight for the exit. Since we're going very slow here, just 60, 70 kilometers or something. This is where traction is going to be very limited on the corner exit. So the more straight the car is, the more late you put the apex, the better it is going to be for traction and accelerating out of that corner. And again, as I said earlier, we're focusing to be fast on the straights, and the best way to do that is with a rather late apex compared to an early or apex in the middle of the corner. Back into the cockpit. Where is my... Ah, nice. My mouse has gone. This is not good. There's a mouse. There we go. And we keep going. Perhaps when this line disappears. All right. Back to the game. And forward to the last two turns. Same thing here, finding a brake marker. The ideal line starts a bit early, 100 meter board. We are still going past that. It is more going to be about the bridge. And before that bridge, you'll see there's a bit of a bright patch on the right side in the grass, depending on your graphic settings. So you might want to work with the bridge here instead. Depends what you're seeing. But yeah, this is where the grass gets a bit brighter. This is what I use as a marker. It doesn't work as well as night, but you can work with a bridge here as well, similar to turn 1 and a certain distance towards that. Then straight line braking, we can be aggressive initially, just keep it straight, not much to do. And then once we start turning the steering wheel, the brake is slowly going to let go. Again, here is going to be a lot of curb that we can use. Let me adjust the camera a little back so we can see the corner better from the outside of the car. And they are doing weird things with curbs here in Zolder. So initially the curb is getting wider, then it gets super wide, then it gets narrow again. There are sausages in the middle. They could never really decide what they want from the driver. And even worse so, this curb here in the beginning is wider than it is going to be after, whatever this construction here is. Just make sure once you go over these curbs here, what you want to do is have a bit of throttle applied already, which is going to stabilize the car, similar to the other chicanes. And that your throttle position defines the amount of rotation the car is going to have. The amount of stability can be controlled with the throttle there. And while the car rumbles over these curbs, it's very helpful with the throttle to stabilize the car here. A lot of curb is possible, both in terms of track limits and also in terms of bumpiness. And then you will be around a lap here in Zolder. So now I'm just going to run it for you in full speed. Make sure you check out popometer.io, register. You're going to have this data pack in your account for free. You can do the comparison when you download the recorder, and then hopefully you'll have your license soon. Again, 7 laps below the average of 132.5, which is more than 5 seconds slower than the current fastest lap. Focus on driving clean, focus on staying wide, on braking, tight in the middle of the turn, running wide again, not too harsh braking, don't overwhelm the car, and then you should be fine to get your license and see you on the track.